Hey everybody, thank you for clicking. I'm BJ, this is Brickhouse Builds. For those of you who are new here, this is a CX500 that I've been building for over a year now. We have a GL650 engine swapped in, we got Mikuni carbs, Ducati rear suspension, Cognito wheels, Gixxer front suspension, big old trash can lid brakes. There's a lot of fabrication in this thing, there's a lot of details. So this video is going to conclude the electrical side of things, and what I'm going to do is go through the full harness build. You've seen some of that in the fundamentals video or even the tips and tricks video. If you haven't seen those, click now. But we're going to conclude the wiring portion, and I'll give you a full Morty installation and then take you through each individual system on the bike and show you, give you a rough idea of how I wired those in. So anyway, this thing's ready to run, and this is a big step forward here. So stick around, and I hope you enjoy. Alright guys, so we are getting ready to final loom this harness. Now, this harness has taken me quite a while to do, not because of the complication of the wiring itself, the routing and stuff like that. I mean, everything goes where it needs to go, and the components themselves are not overly difficult. The challenge for me, and I put this upon myself, is because I'm using non-split loom. The loom I'm using is this Nymex stuff, and there's no break in it, so you have to feed it over everything. You can't just, have everything routed and tied and then put the loom over it. So basically, the way I have to approach this is I have to have one end that's terminated, okay? And then from here, I'm going to pull all the wire that's passing through my, pass-throughs here. I have to pull it all back out this way, and then slide the loom on, and then hopefully get it to about here. And then from there, I have to, make my terminations on the back side. So it's just been really complicated because you have to think, like, if let's say I need to service something, I'm always talking about that. You have to service something. You don't want to have to, chop something up to get it out. So the way I'm looking at it here, if I need to service the harness and if I need to remove it, it's going to go from back to front. And the way we'll do that is because this side is only going to have a solder connection. There's not going to be a physical connector on here on these outputs. So that'll keep those slim. And then as far as this side, there's going to be a very small, basically like data cable type connection. Now, I can easily de-pin those connectors. So once I start pulling this loom out, that creates a little bit of space in this. And then once I start pulling this out, then the more wires that come out, the more space I'll have to maneuver everything. So it's going to be a challenge regardless, and I hope I never have to, pull them. But it's definitely something I have to think ahead on. And so that's why it's been like, I feel like I've been dragging on, but it's just, I have to get it perfect, and I have to get it right first try because there's really no going back here. So as of now, I got my loom, and I'm getting ready. I'm going to get ready to just start looming the outer ends here. And then what I'll be doing is I'll be looming the ends with their individual circuits. And then right about here where the zip tie is, that's going to be my main branch out point. So everything's going to be loomed from the front side to that zip tie. And then we'll go ahead, pull it, and then everything will be on one loom all the way back. So I know maybe this sounds a little bit complicated to explain, that's okay, but it's gonna start looking gorgeous, so I'm excited. I'm gonna get to work. Okay, so as you see, I just removed the harness from the bike itself, and it's a very simplistic harness. There's just, your inputs and then the ultimate outputs from the controllers, and then just a few outputs up here. So it's at its thickest right here, it's not that complicated, but I am going above and beyond, and I'm using, as I said, non-split loom harness wrap here. So what I could do, and it would be all right, I could loom it in, like, let's say Tessa tape or split loom or something like that. It would make my life a whole lot easier, but that's never the case. So what we're going to do is work on looming this. Now, I have to do like a reverse order of operations here, and it's very crucial. Now, the issue I have right now is this pin right here. This is the first pin that I started on the harness. So this is actually where I started building from and laying it out. Now, in the instance of this non-split loom, just the instance of the solid, full wrap loom, you want to try to create your branches all at one point, and that makes looming a lot easier. Now, as you see, I have my branches about right here. And then I have a secondary branch here, and then of course I have my grounds. So what I have to do is figure out how to get a single piece on here. There's going to be multiple pieces of loom, but to try to keep it clean. So right here, I drew a mark, and you can see this black wire. This is my ground, and that's the ground that's running back up to my common ground point, okay? And this is for my gauge power. Now, what I'm going to have to do is depin this connector, which is no big deal, and keep the black wire kind of by itself. And then I'll take this bundle of circuits and completely separate them from the harness. And then from there, I can actually slide in a piece of loom, about that long, and it'll fit just in this section. And then from there, we'll have another section of loom for this little branch, and then we'll be able to cover everything with heat shrink and seal it at those points where that loom may, have a transition. So like right here, I'm going to have one piece of loom and another piece of loom, okay? But I'm going to have a piece of heat shrink over the top of this, and that's going to seal this loom section and this loom section along with this loom section. So everything is going to be nice and sealed. And of course, I'm using adhesive lined heat shrink. So it's going to offer, with the adhesive, once it melts, it creates that seal. And then it also helps create a good strain relief. Now, if you compare this to like a traditional just thin wall, I mean, this stuff's really flexible. And it has its purpose and it has its place. Where if, like sometimes where I use it is if I want to keep, like, let's say this bend, I might cut like a tiny little piece off, put it here, put it there, and then it'll actually tension itself, think of it like a rubber band, and keep that bend going. That way your harness kind of stays its shape. So, but this stuff, I use it a lot. You can see I have a plethora of heat shrink here, and it's all adhesive lined, and I just try to use it where it needs to be. So as you can see, everything here is adhesive lined, and then we're gonna put another piece right here that's gonna seal to those, and it's a lot of steps, and I know I'm rambling, but just stuff you have to consider. So as of now, I'm going to work on depinning that and then isolating this section from the harness itself, and that way I can start feeding on some loom. All right, guys, big moment here. We have most everything wired. There's still no ignition sub harness on here. I'm gonna go ahead and finish routing the pickup upwards, and then kind of work my way back from there and meet in the middle. But except for 3 terminals, we have the entire Morty system wired. So let me show you around. Gauge powers up. Obviously the headlight's on. May not be able to see this, but we have a sweet halo light in here. Taillight's looking awesome. As far as controls, and one more thing you might notice, I'm going to change the turn signal. Headlight's going to flicker. And that's on purpose, just like a visibility thing. Or high beam. And that's when I have the signal to shut off the halo. I'm not going to do the horn because that'll blow out your eardrums. So the Morty system, you just touch the brake, automatically flicks 3 times and then stays on bright. So that's another cool feature. And you can change all these flash patterns and stuff. So one thing I have not done is tried to roll it over. So I just hooked up my starter cable. I just threw a quart of oil in it. So I have legit not tried this. I'm going to take out my rags here. There shouldn't be any interference on these. We'll know real quick if there is. But I have my my neutral indicator, or my neutral signal, is also tapped into my clutch, because I wanted to not have a clutch override on this, or a clutch safety. So this one just has 2 inputs basically for neutral and clutch to simulate that. So it will not crank unless it's in neutral, which it is. So there is no ignition, but might have to have that to crank. So here we go. It's crank. Oh, yes. That sounds good. I'm gonna keep playing with this thing. Alright guys, to get started, this is an all-out, full custom wiring harness build that I did for this bike, built around a few key components. Now, we are focused on a NUUT Morty system. This is their Gen 2. We have their Becky unit to control my fan. We have the Rayson ignition setup here. This is the full Hall effect kit. You've seen the install video there. And then a lithium-ion battery along with some other components. So we have all the good stuff on this one, and it came out really clean, which is a goal. So there's a lot of functionality. It's very clean. Now, let's start going through systems. All right, first up, our battery. So here you can see I have just my main power cable ran from the positive terminal up to my solenoid. Okay. Now from the solenoid we have power switched through how you would normally do it, and our output side follows the same path all the way down to the starter itself. Okay, real simple. Now the negative side, you can't really see it, but there's another 6-gauge cable hidden behind here, and that runs down my frame straight up to my ground path right there. And this is my common ground point. I typically put these in the middle of the bike, as you see, and everything is grounded right here, save for a couple components back here which have a common ground point and a separate battery attachment. So we kept that real simple, real clean. You've seen in the other videos how I potentially make cables and stuff like that. So anyway, we have a lot of heat shrink, we have a lot of loom, and everything is just nice and tidy and clean, and then very secure. You saw in another video I did these little tabs here. Now these are just welded to the frame itself, and this was all in anticipation for actually using zip ties to hold things steady to the frame so they don't move. And you can see here, by doing that, I kept it really clean. And the cool part is, you come down here, there's nothing extending below the bar. So this has a very, very slim profile, which is something I was really after. You gotta work hard for that. Staying in the back of the bike, we have the Radiance LED taillight, okay? And then we have, this is I think a 35 LED, something like that, but we have the module built in here. It's tucked into this heat shrink there, but there's a dual element module, so that lets it act as a run and brake light. And you can actually wire these and get these built with turn signals, and these are a really high quality light. I've used them a lot of times, and they look really good. So we recessed this in the hoop itself. I'll put the video link above, but this is a very intensive project, but it came out really clean and I'm glad I did it. Moving on, we have power coming out of the battery into this fuse block here. This is a MetroPack kit, so I got from Cycle Terminal, and this allows me to kind of branch off and keep different electrical components isolated, so to speak, or at least protected via fuse and a bus bar system. So power comes into the fuse block, and then it goes out through a single fuse that I have 20 amp, and it goes into my ignition switch here. Okay, this is more of an HD style. This kind of Harley style I rewired. I got this from Revival Cycles. Put some new loom on it, and that's ran really clean. So fuse power in, and then we have switch power out. That output side then goes to my Morty and my Becky. So there's your power in on both of these. So that's a 16 gauge or twin 16 gauge cables there. And then from there, that power gets fed to the rest of the bike. So beyond that, I do have a single output, or a single fused output. That's my constant hot, and that's for the COSO digital gauge setup there. So you can see that's for your memory and your clock and whatnot. So very important. And then the switch power for the gauge itself actually is an output from the Morty itself for your gauge backlight. Now the solenoid, this is a more modern style with a built-in fuse. This came from Revival Cycles as well. And this, I have my regulator rectifier constant hot. It is fused, but it's constant hot from the battery itself. And I have that ran all the way back to my rec. I do have a single plug here, and it shares the plug with the ignition switch. I just used a 4-pin there with a traditional blade style. Beyond that, we're moving forward. We have our ignition system here. I did a full wiring, or I did a full install video that you can see above. But this is real simple. We have power drawn from the Morty setup as one of my outputs. And then from there, it's a standalone system where I have just an individual harness. You can see right here. That individual harness is only ran to the coil and then as well as the pickup down low. So real simple. Okay guys, for the rear brake switch, never mind the lack of a bracket here. This is actually, the bracket's off at powder coat right now. But I wanted to keep things really clean and avoid having the old, the old school like plunger and spring type setup. So what I used is a pressure switch, and this is electric here. And this is just tapped off the master cylinder, so whenever you actuate this rod, pressure goes in to feed your brake line. This sensor sees that pressure and outputs a signal, okay, completes the path. So 2 wires into its own loom section, up the bike, back, blah, blah, blah. And that goes to the Morty here as my black and orange input on the 10-pin side. The Becky system here, this is what I use to control the fan because this has a PWM soft start feature. So we run power into it, and then from here we have a ground out, and then the yellow wire is what runs up, and that is actually going to go to the fan up front. And then there's a single ground signal that comes back, and you can run a positive or negative type signal wire for this, and that will tell the Becky unit to send power out where it needs to go. So once this thing sees ground through my coolant temperature switch, or my temperature switch down here low on the radiator, once this hits a certain degree, this is going to tell my fan or send a ground path up to the Becky, and that tells my fan to turn on. So this is a really cool trick way of doing this with my big old bandit fan that I have molded onto the actual stock CX500 radiator here. Now moving on, we have, now this is a temporary tack input. I'm trying out different things to make sure I get the best signal for the COSO there. But this is an Ultima coil, and real simple, single fire. There's 3 inputs here. There's a power and then your left and right coil, and then that is controlled by the Rayson, of course. We have a regular old horn here, nothing special. We have our Rix regulator rectifier, and this just has 2 red, 2 black. Those are tied in. You can see the 2 red wires, they go back to the solenoid as I mentioned. The 2 black are just grounds, so they loop up and they go straight to my ground point there. So you have direct ground basically to battery, because we have our large 6 gauge that runs to the battery here, and then we have the Rix unit, which is right here, okay, and then this ground branch is for the rest of the harness that sends ground elsewhere on the bike. Okay, for controls, we actually have some CRF 250 controls that I picked up from Revzilla. These are new. And the reason I did these versus, like, let's say micro switches or something like that is I wanted a very almost like OEM type look to it. So these have like a nice factory fit and finish. They're pretty clean. They're not overly bulky. Yeah, they're not like the smallest things in the world, but they look really good. They're comfortable and they're very easy to understand. Now you can have the ability with the Morty system to actually use momentary switches versus what these are, which is latching. You can understand that real quick. So the horn here, that's a momentary. It's only contact when you push it and then it comes off, but like your headlight, that's a latching style. So anyway, got to do your research with that, but again, I wanted to use a nice, clean, factory quality type switch. Staying on the bars, we actually have Rizoma turn signals here. Those are just wired in with an output through the bar here and then back into our harness that you'll see. Those are really clean. I really like these things. They light up well. They're very visible. And then in the middle here, our focal piece is a COSO DB02R digital, multi-function gauge. So this one has a whole ton of features, whether it be like shift lights. It has 2 temperature inputs. It has your RPM, your tach. It has different trips. It even has a built-in fuel gauge should you want to use that. and then we can change all the parameters of this stuff. So this is a really trick piece. I've been getting it dialed in for this bike, but definitely a really cool item. Very compact, 2 buttons, easy to understand, so it's a really nice piece. Okay, this section right here where you start seeing all my plugs, this is what we'll talk about now. I'll tell you exactly how I branched everything off, how all of the different circuits are ran, and then how we send power or signal all the way back to the Morty system. So let's start with our turn signals, since these are really simple. Okay, we have 2 turn signals. We have a wire coming out of a hole drilled in the bar up front, and then that is ran to this plug right here. So you can see I have 4 wire input. I have left and right signal, one's marked with heat shrink, and then the 2 center wires are ground. Now those are actually branched into a single ground wire in the middle, and then on the outside here we have our converting to the signal wire for the Morty that it calls for on its diagram. So we have a green and a yellow. Those run back as an input to the Morty, okay? And I'll go through those later. The right bar control, we have our kill switch, we have our horn button, and then on that we have our front brake switch that you can't see, it's hidden right there. Okay, for that side, we only have 4 wires, okay? Now, note that these are JWPN, these are very small compact wires with 22 gauge wire, okay? Now, that's because we're not actually passing current through the controls. All we need is a ground signal, and then the Morty controls the rest. So what we have here, we have orange for the brake, purple for the start signal, red for the ignition signal, and then there's a black for ground. Ground is self-explanatory. It's going to run in, and then it joins in our main ground point here. Okay, and then these from here, they maintain the same color code per the Morty. They run back as an input. I'll show you that as well. All right. For the left side bar control, we have headlight, high, low, horn, and then we have our left-right turn signal. And then if this is in a factory setup, you do have the option for a clutch switch, so that's something to note. But coming out of that one, we have a few more wires, okay? Again, all 22 gauge. So from here, again, I was able to keep these, since I rewired the controls, I was able to keep these as a color code per the Morty, okay? And they again run to the input side. Some of the smaller terminals here, that's actually the gauge inputs and outputs. It has its own sensors, so it's more of a standalone setup. And again, the tag signal here, I'm trying out different things. So all I have to do is just really terminate it once I figure out how I want it. But you know, there's different options here if you want a negative or positive type input, and then if you need a shielded cable or not. So that's just what I'm working on now, but it works, and I'll probably just put a nice ring terminal on it and put it to the left signal wire there, and we'll be good to go. Okay. Moving on back, we have all of our inputs, we have all of our inputs, and those are going to go to the Morty here. All right, so to walk you through actually pinning out the Morty system, obviously we have our power in, and then we have our ground out. That's just coming off of these 3 terminals here. And then on these 3 bundles of loom, I have them branched out from our main harness, and this is our input side to our right bar control. This is from the left bar control, and then this bundle for the 10-pin multifunction, this is actually an input and output. Let me walk you through those. So from the right bar control, I have this split in this little bundle. The orange is for the front brake switch, purple is for the start switch, red is for the kill switch. And what you can't see is there's 2 black wires under here. I have those sent to ground. But if you had, like, let's say an old Honda where you had a full headlight on-off power setup, that is where those would tie in there. And that's explained in the provided diagram. Moving on to the left bar control here, you see I have a pink wire, and that pink wire is actually branched from the same thing, from the same signal. That's my neutral switch. Now, what the pink I have doing is actually acting as the clutch function, or the clutch safety switch. So I have that tapped as a neutral. So I don't have a clutch safety. What I have is a neutral, so the bike will not crank unless it's in neutral. So that is one deviation I made here. Then I have my yellow and green. Those are my turn signals. And then beyond that, you can see there's my gray wire. That's for the horn. And then blue is for high beam. So there's no low beam signal because they figure if the thing's not on high, then it's in low. So they simplify that and have one less wire that you have to run around the bike. Now, moving on, the 10 pin, like I said, is input and output. So the black and orange here, these just run down to my rear brake switch. And then the red, this is actually going to my oil pressure. So this is another input, and this just picks up oil pressure and would typically output it to another light if you had that wired. I've already talked about the pink, so again, that's my neutral. And then the brown wire here, this is my gauge backlight power, and this is just my switch 12 that I have running up to the COSO up front. Now, if you were running, let's say, older LEDs or older signals or older gauges on this thing, and you had individual outputs for, say, your high beam indicator, your oil pressure light, turn signal lights, things like that, that is where you would output from here. I am not. So these are just blank. Now, you would have more outputs here on this side, like I said. They provide the necessary resistors and stuff to run your wires, if you, like I said, if you had those indicators. But we're not using those, so they're left blank. Moving on to the output side, even more simple. So you can see green and yellow, that's output to the turn signal, so those head right back up to the front of the bike. My brown and orange wire here, this is my run and brake light signal, so those come out, go straight back, and those go to my tail light. White is low beam, blue high beam, gray is my horn. You've seen me talk about the ignition setup, so the red here is the ignition output to my race on. And then here, purple and black, that is my starter solenoid, so those go up to the solenoid, and we're good to go. And that is literally it. So the hardest part is not wiring it, but the hardest part is rather just planning how to make it clean. So you can actually have a lot of functionality here. You can change your mode setup, your power, input, output, and a few other things just to kind of dial it in how you want. But overall, very straightforward. Alright guys, that does it for this one. Hopefully you found this video informative with a nice general rundown of installing the NWT system, some of the functions, and how you run the inputs and outputs side of things to your corresponding controls. I wanted a high quality, more OE fit and finish type system that was easy to use, so that's why I went with some OEM type controls, and that's why I went with the components that I did. So yeah, hopefully you understand what it really takes to build a custom harness for one of these things, and how much thinking is involved, in the pre-planning stages as well as the execution of it, in the instance that you might have to service something, or even those zip ties with holding this, holding it to the frame to maintain a clean look. Think ahead, try to plan as much as you can, look at your diagrams, do your research, and you should be able to come out with something real clean without being too overwhelmed and without spending, more money than you really have to. I know this is not a cheap system, but it's also not the most expensive, So anyway, hopefully we had some good information in here. And if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to hit me up in the comments. I'm more than happy to answer them. Or try to send you on a path for the information that you need. So anyway, if you haven't subscribed already, please do so. You definitely don't want to miss the first start video and then those videos that are going to come after this thing, because at this point we're packing this thing full of those teeny tiny finishing details, and it's looking awesome. So it's going to be a really awesome bike when it's done. You don't want to miss out on it. Lastly, you want to pick up a hat, a hoodie, a shirt, something that helps support Brickhouse Builds. All you got to do, go to brickhousebuilds.com, and you can grab one for yourself, girlfriend, mom, who knows, anybody. But any orders are greatly appreciated. So thanks for sticking with me this long, and I hope to see you in the next one.